The National War Museum in Washington, D.C. was quiet on Tuesday mornings. Most tourists came on weekends, so the weekday crowds were thin, mostly retirees. History buffs, school groups shuffled through by bored teachers. The air inside smelled like old wood and mothballs. That particular scent of preserved history that every museum seems to share. In the Vietnam War exhibit, behind thick glass in a climate-controlled display case, hung a uniform, olive-drab fatigues, worn, faded, patches barely visible. A name tape across the chest read Sergeant Harrison. The placard beside it explained in neat typed letters, U.S. Army, 173rd Airborne Brigade, Operation Junction City, 1967 to 1968, donated anonymously. This uniform was worn during one of the largest airborne operations since World War II. An old man stood in front of the case. He was thin, maybe 75, with white hair combed back and a face carved with deep lines. He wore simple clothes, dark slacks, a plain button-down shirt, a windbreaker that had seen better years. His hands were behind his back as he stared at the uniform. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. A security guard noticed him. The old man had been standing there for 20 minutes, not reading the other exhibits, not moving, just standing. The guard walked over, boots squeaking on the polished floor. "Sir, you okay?" The old man didn't respond at first. Then, quietly, he said, "That's mine." The guard frowned. "What's yours?" "The uniform. That's my uniform. I wore it." The guard's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. He'd heard this before. Old guys coming in, claiming they'd owned this rifle, or that medal, or some piece of history they wanted to feel connected to. It was sad, really. "Sir, that uniform was donated to the museum decades ago. It is part of the permanent collection." The old man turned to look at him. His eyes were pale blue, the kind that had seen too much Sunday, too much fire. "I know. I'm the one who donated it." The guard didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded slowly, the way you nod at someone you don't quite believe but don't want to argue with. "All right, sir. Well, it's a nice display. You have a good day now." The old man turned back to the case. "I'd like it back." The guard blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said I'd like it back. It's mine. I want to take it home." Now the guard's patience was thinning. "Sir, you can't just take things from the museum. That's not how this works. I'm not taking it. I'm reclaiming it. There's a difference." The guard reached for his radio. "I'm gonna need you to step back from the display, sir." The old man didn't move, just kept staring at the uniform behind the glass. After a long moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, worn at the creases. He held it out. The guard hesitated, then took it. It was a letter, handwritten, dated February 14th, 1985. It was addressed to the National War Museum, care of the curator. The letter explained that the writer was donating his combat uniform from Vietnam, that he didn't want recognition, didn't want his name on the plaque, just wanted the uniform to be preserved so people will remember. At the bottom, a signature, Thomas J. Harrison, Sergeant, U.S. Army. The guard looked up at the old man. "You're Harrison?" The old man nodded. The guard looked back at the letter, then at the display case, then at the old man. He didn't know what to do. This was above his pay grade. "I'm gonna need to get my supervisor." 5 minutes later, a woman in her 40s arrived. She was the museum's assistant curator, a sharp woman named Dr. Ellen Reeves. She wore glasses on a chain and carried a tablet. She looked annoyed at being pulled away from her work. "What's the issue?" the guard explained. "This man says the uniform in the Vietnam exhibit is his. Says he donated it in 1985. Wants it back." Dr. Reeves looked at the old man with barely concealed irritation. "Sir, items donated to this museum become property of the institution. They cannot be reclaimed. That's standard policy." The old man's voice was calm. "I understand that. But I didn't know what I was doing back then. I was angry. I wanted to forget. Now I'm old. I'm dying. And I want it back." Dr. Reeves softened slightly, but her answer didn't change. "I'm very sorry to hear that. But the uniform is part of a curated exhibit. It's been here for almost 40 years. We can't just remove it because someone changes their mind. The old man reached into his other pocket and pulled out another piece of paper. This one was newer, a medical document. Dr. Reeves took it, scanned it quickly. It was a diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Prognosis, 3 to 6 months. She looked up at him, her expression shifting. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Harrison, but I still can't authorize the return of the uniform. It's been cataloged, preserved, documented. It's part of history now. It's my history, the old man said quietly, and I'd like to hold it one more time before I die. Dr. Reeves hesitated. She wasn't heartless, but she had rules, procedures, insurance policies. You understand this? Puts me in a very difficult position. I understand. She sighed. Let me speak with the director. Please wait here. She walked away, tablet in hand, heels clicking down the marble corridor. The old man turned back to the display. The guard stood awkwardly beside him. After a moment, the guard spoke. Were you really there? In Vietnam? The old man nodded. What was it like? The old man didn't answer right away. Then he said, loud, hot, confusing. You did what you were told and hoped you made it to tomorrow. The guard was young, maybe 25. He never served, never been in the war. He looked at the uniform in the case with new eyes. What did you do there? I jumped out of airplanes and tried not to die. Did you? The guard hesitated. Did you kill anyone? The old man's jaw tightened. Yes. The guard didn't ask anything else. 15 minutes later, Dr. Reeves returned. Behind her was an older man in a suit. He was the museum director, a retired Army colonel named Gerald Winters. He had silver hair, a stern face, and walked with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent decades in uniform. He stopped in front of the old man and extended his hand. Mr. Harrison, I'm Colonel Winters. Dr. Reeves tells me you'd like to reclaim your uniform. They shook hands. The old man nodded. That's right. Winters studied him carefully. You served with the 173rd? Yes, sir. What unit? 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry, Charlie Company. Winters' expression changed. He knew that unit, knew its history. They'd taken heavy casualties in 67 and 68, some of the worst fighting of the war. What operation were you in? Junction City, Hale 875, a few others. Winters was silent for a moment. Then he said, I was in the 1st CAF. We crossed paths a few times. I remember hearing about Hill 875. That was hell. It was. Winters looked at the uniform in the case. Then back at Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I understand why you want it back. I truly do. But you have to understand, that uniform represents more than just you. It represents every man who served in that war, every man who didn't come home. If we start returning artifacts, we lose the ability to tell that story. I'm not asking you to forget the story, Harrison said quietly. I'm asking you to let me finish mine. Winters looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Dr. Reeves. Open the case. Her eyes widened. Sir? You heard me. But the insurance, the preservation protocols. I'll take full responsibility. Open it. Dr. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. She retrieved the key from her office, returned, and unlocked the display case. The glass panel swung open with a soft hiss. The smell of old fabric and time drifted out. Harrison stepped forward slowly. He reached out and touched the uniform. His hands trembled. He lifted it from the mannequin carefully, as if it were made of glass, held it against his chest, ran his fingers over the patches, the name tape, the faded bloodstain on the sleeve that no amount of washing had ever removed. His eyes closed. And for a moment, he wasn't in the museum. He was 22 again. He was in the jungle. He was scared and alive and carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. He folded the uniform carefully and held it in his arms like a child. Thank you, he said. Winters nodded. You earned it, Sergeant. Harrison turned to leave. But before he reached the door, Winters called out, Mr. Harrison, one more thing. Harrison stopped, turned. Winters walked over to him, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small case. He opened it. Inside was a medal, the Bronze Star. I can't give you back the years. Can't give you back the friends you lost. But I can give you this. You were recommended for it in 1968. The paperwork got lost. I found it last year in the archives. It's been waiting for you. Harrison stared at the medal. His throat tightened. He couldn't speak. Winters pinned it to his windbreaker. Then he stepped back and saluted. Sharp, clean. The way soldiers salute each other when words aren't enough. Harrison returned the salute. Then he walked out of the museum, uniform in his arms, medal on his chest, and for the first time in 50 years, he felt whole. 3 months later, the museum received the package. Inside was the uniform, cleaned, pressed, folded with military precision. And the letter. It was short. Thank you for letting me say goodbye. You can put it back now. Someone else might need to remember. Sergeant Thomas J. Harrison, 173rd Airborne. The uniform was returned to the display. But this time, the placard was different. It included Harrison's full name, his story, and a new line at the bottom, returned by the soldier who wore it. So we would never forget. The package sat on Dr. Ellen Reeves's desk for 3 days before she opened it. She'd been busy with a new exhibit, coordinating loans from other museums, managing staff, doing the 1,000 small things that kept a place like this running. But when she finally saw the return address, her hands stopped moving. Thomas Harrison. No street, just a P.O. box in a small town in Tennessee she'd never heard of. She opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the uniform. It smelled faintly of detergent and something else. Something she couldn't quite place. Cedar, maybe, or camphor. The fabric had been cleaned professionally, every stitch intact, the patches as faded as they'd been before, but somehow more dignified now. Beneath the uniform was the letter. She read it twice. Then she called Colonel Winters. He came down from his office 10 minutes later. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it, standing up, his face unreadable. When he finished, he folded it carefully and placed it back on her desk. Then he said, "We need to update the exhibit." Dr. Reeves nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. We could add his letter to the display. Maybe a photo if we can find one." Winters shook his head. "No, not just that. We need to tell the whole story. Why he gave it away. Why he took it back. Why he returned it. People need to understand what it cost him." She looked at him. "Do we have permission?" "We have his letter. That's permission enough." It took 6 weeks to redesign the exhibit. They brought in a historian who specialized in Vietnam-era personal narratives. They located photographs of Harrison from the Army archives, young, lean, fierce-eyed in his uniform with his rifle slung over his shoulder. They found his service record, confirmed his participation in Operation Junction City and the battle at Hill 875, one of the bloodiest engagements of the war. They even tracked down 2 men who'd served with him. Both were still alive. Both had stories. One of them, a man named Carl Brewer, drove 8 hours to visit the museum when he heard they were updating the exhibit. He was 76, walked with a limp, and wore a 173rd Airborne cap. He stood in front of the display for a long time, hands in his pockets, just staring. Finally, he spoke to Dr. Reeves, who was standing nearby, taking notes. "Tommy saved my life," he said quietly. "November 1967. We got ambushed. I took a round in the leg, couldn't walk. He carried me half a mile through the jungle with Charlie on our ass the whole way. Never complained, never hesitated, just did it." Dr. Reeves wrote it down. "Did you stay in touch?" Brewer shook his head. "We tried for a while, but Tommy didn't want to talk about it, any of it. He just wanted to forget. After a few years, the letter stopped. I always wonder what happened to him," she told him. About the uniform, about Harrison coming back, about the cancer. Brewer's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked, "Is he still alive?" Dr. Reeves checked her notes. As of 3 weeks ago, yes. But according to his doctors, not for much longer. Brewer nodded slowly. "I'd like to see him." if that's okay, if he'd want that. She gave him the address. Carl Brewer drove to Tennessee the next day. The town was small, one stoplight, a handful of churches, a post office that doubled as a general store. He asked around and found Harrison's place easily. It was a small house at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by trees. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged slightly, but the lawn was mowed and the garden was tended. Someone still cared. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, the door opened. Thomas Harrison stood there, thinner than Brewer remembered. Gaunt, his skin had a gray tint that spoke of sickness, but his eyes were still the same, pale blue, sharp. Harrison stared at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Carl?" Brewer nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, Tommy, it's me." They stood there for a moment, two old soldiers looking at each other across 50 years of silence. Then Harrison stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of the house was neat but sparse. A couch, a chair, a small television, no pictures on the walls, no decorations, just the essentials. Brewer sat down. Harrison eased himself into the chair slowly, wincing slightly. "You look like hell," Brewer said. Harrison smiled faintly. "You should see the other guy." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Brewer said, "I heard what you did with the uniform." Harrison looked down at his hands. "I don't know why I gave it away in the first place. I was angry. Felt like the whole damn country wanted to forget we existed. Figured if I couldn't forget, maybe someone else should remember for me." Brewer nodded. "I get it. But then I got sick. And I started thinking about dying. And I realized I didn't want to die pretending I was never there, that it never happened. So I went back. You should have called me. I would have come with you." Harrison shook his head. It was something I needed to do alone. They talked for hours. About the war, about the men they served with, about the ones who didn't make it home. Harrison told him about Hill 875, about carrying Brewer through the jungle, about the nightmares that still came sometimes in the night. Brewer told him about his life after, his kids, his grandkids, the business he'd built and sold, the quiet life he'd made for himself. As the sun started to set, Brewer stood to leave. Before he reached the door, he turned back. "Tommy, you saved my life. I never got to thank you properly." Harrison waved it off. "You would have done the same." "Maybe, but you actually did it. That counts for something." Harrison didn't respond. Brewer left, but he didn't go far. He checked into a motel in town and came back the next day, and the day after that, he visited Harrison every day for the next 2 weeks. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat together, two old soldiers keeping each other company. On the 15th day, Harrison was too weak to get out of bed. Brewer sat in a chair beside him. They didn't talk much. Harrison drifted in and out of sleep. At one point, he opened his eyes and looked at Brewer. "You didn't have to come," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, I did." Harrison nodded slightly, his eyes closed. When they opened again, he said, "I'm glad you did." He died 3 hours later. Brewer was there, holding his hand, making sure he didn't die alone the way so many of their friends had. The funeral was small, a handful of people, some distant relatives, a few neighbors, Brewer, and, to everyone's surprise, Colonel Winters and Dr. Reeves from the museum. They'd driven down from D.C. when they heard. At the gravesite, a military honor guard performed the burial ceremony. They folded the flag with crisp precision and presented it to Brewer, who accepted it with shaking hands. Taps played, slow, mournful. The sound carried across the small cemetery and into the trees beyond. After the service, Winters approached Brewer. They never met, but Winters extended his hand. "Carl Brewer?" Brewer nodded, wiping his eyes. "That's me. I'm Gerald Winters. I gave Tommy his Bronze Star." Brewer's face tightened. "He told me. Thank you for that." Winters shook his head. "I should have done it 50 years ago." Brewer didn't argue. Back at the museum, the updated exhibit opened 2 months later. It was more than just a uniform in a case now. It was a story. Tommy Harrison's story. They displayed his uniform alongside photographs from his service, letters he'd written home, the Bronze Star Winters had given him, and the letter he sent when he returned the uniform. The centerpiece was a large panel with his story printed in clear, respectful text. It explained who he was, what he'd done, why he'd given the uniform away, and why he'd taken it back. It ended with a single line. Some men carry the war their entire lives. Tommy Harrison carried it with grace. The exhibit drew crowds. Veterans came, students came, families came. People stood in front of it and read every word. Some cried, some saluted, some just stood in silence, honoring a man they'd never met, but whose story reminded them of someone they knew. Carl Brewer visited the exhibit once. He stood in front of it for a long time, hands in his pockets, tears running down his face. Dr. Reeves approached him quietly. "Mr. Brewer?" He turned. She handed him something. It was a photograph. Harrison in his uniform. Young, strong, smiling slightly. On the back, someone had written, "Charlie Company, 1967. "This one's for you," she said. Brewer took it, held it carefully. "Thank you." He carried that photograph in his wallet for the rest of his life, and every year on the anniversary of Harrison's death, he drove to that small cemetery in Tennessee, stood by the grave, told his old friend about his year, about his family, about the world, and every year, before he left, he said the same thing. "I got you, Tommy. You're not forgotten." Because that's what soldiers do. They carry their brothers, in life, in death, and in memory, forever.